The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the foreign landscape. The winds of the planet howled through the rugged terrain, carrying with them the smell of alien flora and the distant rumble of unfamiliar creatures. The protagonist, a seasoned soldier by the name of Marcus, stood on the edge of the rocky cliff, staring out at the vast expanse before him. His boots dug into the dust, and the weight of his gun felt heavier with every passing minute. He had once been a proud fighter, a soldier in the war for humanity's survival, but now he was stranded. This barren world, light years from Earth, was where the battle had ended for him. Marcus had been captured during a disastrous battle against a powerful alien force. It had been a fierce conflict, one that humanity had lost, leaving few survivors. For weeks he had been imprisoned in a high-tech cell, fed only scraps and denied any contact with others. He had known his chances of survival were slim, but when they came in the form of an offer. It wasn't the humans who came to save him, but the aliens who ruled this star system. The queen of their empire, a being known only as Zalora, had watched Marcus with curiosity. She was a being of immense power, the ruler of an entire galaxy, but she had something that Marcus desperately wanted: freedom. Zalora had sent her emissaries to offer him a deal, an offer he never thought would come. He could leave the planet, return to his people, and be free again. But there was a catch, a bargain he would need to fulfill in exchange for his release. It wasn't a simple matter of just walking away. It required him to marry her daughter. The princess, she had told him, had lost her husband years ago. The death of her mate had been a source of sorrow for her, and despite the years that had passed, she had not found another suitor. She was the rightful heir to the throne, the future ruler of the empire, but she was without a partner. The queen, seeing an opportunity in Marcus, offered him his freedom in return for one thing: his marriage to her daughter. He would gain his freedom, and in return, he would become part of the royal family, uniting the future of the empire with the strength of humanity. At first, Marcus had been stunned by the proposition. The idea of marrying an alien princess seemed impossible, even laughable. How could he, a simple soldier, become part of something so grand? But the thought of returning to Earth, of being free from the prison he had been kept in, was too tempting to ignore. There was no way back. He was stuck here, and this was his only chance. He thought of his family back home, of the people he had left behind, and the promises he had made. He had no idea what would come of this strange alien marriage, but he knew he had to take the offer. For his people, for his future, he had to play along. It was a decision born out of desperation. But as he was led to the palace of the queen, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What kind of marriage was this? Was he simply being used as a pawn in some grand political game? He knew the answer, but he had no choice but to play along. The palace was a towering structure of glimmering metal and shimmering stone, its spires reaching high into the sky. The air inside was thick with the scent of incense and the hum of strange alien machinery. The walls were lined with portraits of the queen and her ancestors, each one an imposing figure, their eyes staring down at Marcus as he walked through the grand hall. He was led into a chamber at the heart of the palace, where the queen awaited him. She was seated on a throne made of gleaming obsidian, her form tall and regal, draped in flowing robes that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her eyes bright and calculating. She radiated power, the kind of power that could bend entire star systems to her will. "Marcus," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, "you are here because I believe you have potential, not just as a soldier, but as someone who can help shape the future of my empire." Marcus stood before her, unsure of what to say. He had never imagined he would find himself in a situation like this. The queen was unlike anyone he had ever met, her presence both terrifying and captivating. "I've seen what you can do, Marcus," she continued. "You fought for your people. You led them with honor. And now I offer you a chance to build a future with my daughter." The queen's words weighed heavily on Marcus. He had heard of royal politics, of the delicate balance of power that existed in the courts of the galaxy. This was no ordinary marriage. This was an alliance, a joining of two forces that could change the fate of the universe. But as the queen spoke, Marcus couldn't help but feel a growing sense of doubt. What was her true motive? Why him? Why offer freedom for something as simple as a marriage? There had to be more to this, something he didn't understand. "I will give you your freedom," the queen said, her eyes narrowing, "but there is one condition. You must marry my daughter. Only then will I release you from your bonds." Marcus thought of the princess, the mysterious woman he had not yet met. He had heard whispers about her, how she was known as the widow princess mourning the loss of her previous husband, a powerful figure in her own right. She had been secluded for years, and it was said that she had become cold, distant, and unwilling to open her heart to anyone. The idea of marrying a woman he didn't know, a woman who had suffered so much loss, was a daunting thought. How could he ever live up to such a responsibility? But he had no choice. Freedom was a powerful motivator, and it was a gift he could not afford to turn down. "I will do it," Marcus said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty in his chest. "I will marry your daughter if it means I can return home." The queen smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "Prepare yourself. You will meet her soon enough." As Marcus was escorted away from the queen's presence, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into a world far beyond his understanding. What awaited him in the palace, and what kind of woman would he find as the future queen? The story was just beginning, and already Marcus felt as if he were standing at the edge of something far bigger than himself. The weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders, but there was no turning back now. And so the journey began, a journey that would take him into the heart of an alien empire, a journey where the stakes were higher than he could ever have imagined. Would he find freedom in this strange marriage, or would he become nothing more than a pawn in a galactic game that would shape the future of two worlds? The answers lay ahead, and Marcus was ready to face whatever came his way, even if it meant walking down a path he never thought he would have to tread. Marcus stood outside the grand doors of the princess's chambers, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the decision he had just made. The queen had given him her word. Freedom in exchange for a marriage to her daughter. It sounded simple enough when she had first laid out the terms, but now, standing before the entrance to the princess's room, it felt far more complicated. The doors opened with a soft hum, revealing a spacious, elegant chamber that seemed to shimmer with a quiet, almost mystical light. The walls were lined with rich tapestries, each depicting scenes of alien battles and victories, with colors that were unlike anything he had ever seen on Earth. The air smelled faintly of exotic flowers and the faintest hint of something metallic, a scent he couldn't place. At the far end of the room stood a woman, her back to him, looking out of the wide glass window that overlooked the palace gardens. She was tall, almost as tall as Marcus himself, and her long flowing hair seemed to shine like silver in the soft light. Her skin was a pale lavender, a color that still seemed unnatural to Marcus, though he had grown used to the alien appearances of the beings he had encountered. For a moment, Marcus hesitated. He had never met the princess before, and all he knew of her was what the queen had told him. She had lost her husband years ago and had secluded herself from the rest of the world ever since. She was the future ruler of this empire, but that future seemed uncertain, clouded by grief and the absence of a strong partner by her side. She turned suddenly, as if sensing his presence, and Marcus found himself staring into her eyes. They were striking, clear, deep violet, with a sadness in them that seemed to run deeper than anything he had ever seen. Her expression was guarded, but there was something in her gaze that told Marcus she was not as indifferent as she appeared. "Marcus, I presume?" Her voice was soft, yet it carried an authority that reminded him of the queen. The princess did not smile, but neither did she seem angry. Instead, she looked at him with a quiet curiosity. Marcus straightened his posture, trying to compose himself. He had spent years in combat situations, facing enemies much more intimidating than this. Yet now, standing before this woman, he felt more vulnerable than he ever had before.
"Yes, Your Highness," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady.
"I've been instructed to meet with you." The princess nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his very soul.
"Are you ready to fulfill your part of the bargain?" she asked, her tone even but tinged with something Marcus couldn't quite place. I'm here, aren't I?" Marcus replied, more sharply than he had intended. He quickly cleared his throat. "I will do whatever is necessary." The princess's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned away from him and walked toward a small table in the center of the room. She gestured for him to follow. "Come," she said quietly. "Sit with me." Marcus hesitated but obeyed. He followed her to the table, where a pitcher of some dark, fragrant liquid sat next to 2 crystal goblets. She poured some into each and handed one to him. "Thank you," Marcus muttered, taking the goblet in his hand. He had no idea what the drink was, but it smelled sweet, like fruit, with a slight tang to it. The princess raised her own glass and took a sip, then placed it down on the table with a gentle clink. She didn't speak for a moment, instead looking at him with an intensity that made Marcus feel both uncomfortable and intrigued. "I've heard about you," she said finally. "The great soldier, the man who fought for his people. I know what you did to survive, how you were captured by my mother's forces. You fought to the very end, didn't you?" Marcus nodded slowly, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I did what I had to do, to survive, to protect my people." The princess's lips curved into a faint, almost melancholic smile. "And now you're here in the service of my mother, as her guest. A strange twist of fate, wouldn't you say?"
"Strange, yes,"
Marcus agreed, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of his glass. "But necessary, I suppose." The princess leaned back in her chair, her gaze softening slightly. "Do you understand what you're being asked to do, Marcus? Do you truly know what marrying me will mean?" Marcus looked into her eyes, trying to gauge her emotions. I was told it would grant me my freedom," he said quietly. "But beyond that, I don't know what to expect." The princess studied him for a long time before speaking again. "It will give you your freedom, yes, but it will also change your life in ways you can't even imagine. It won't just be a union of 2 people. It will be a political marriage. You will be joining my family, becoming part of a royal legacy that stretches back for centuries." She paused, as if considering her next words carefully.
"And you will be expected to help rule. You will help lead this empire alongside me."
Marcus frowned. "I don't know the first thing about ruling an empire." The princess's eyes flickered with something that could have been amusement. "Neither did my first husband, but that didn't stop him from taking the throne beside me. And look where that got him." There was no malice in her voice, but there was a sharp edge to her words that made Marcus uneasy. He could feel the weight of her grief, the sorrow that clung to her every word, but there was also a sense of pride. She was not weak, not by any means. "You don't want this, do you?" Marcus said before he could stop himself. The princess looked at him, her expression unreadable. "No, I don't. But I have no choice, do I?" She stood up suddenly, walking over to the window. The soft light from the setting sun bathed her figure in a golden glow. "My mother has made it clear that this marriage is a necessity. For the good of the empire. And for me, I suppose." Marcus rose from his chair, feeling a strange mix of sympathy and confusion. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "But this wasn't my idea." "I didn't think it was," the princess replied softly, turning back to face him. "But it doesn't matter now, does it? We're both trapped in this, whether we like it or not." The silence between them hung heavy in the air. Marcus found himself at a loss for words. This wasn't the princess he had imagined. He had thought she would be cold and distant, a woman of power who had no time for a soldier like him. But now, seeing her here, vulnerable and uncertain, he realized just how much they had in common. I don't want to be your prisoner, Marcus," she said after a long pause. "But that's what this marriage will make me. A prisoner of duty, of obligation. I wanted a life of my own. A life where I could choose my path." Marcus took a step toward her, his voice softening.
"I understand. More than you know."
"But maybe this can be something more than just a political arrangement. Maybe we can build something together." The princess met his gaze, and for a moment, Marcus thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. But it was gone before he could be sure.
"Maybe," she whispered, "but not yet."
Not now. Marcus had spent days in the palace getting used to the strange customs and rules of the alien world that he had become a part of. He spent his time studying the culture of the empire, trying to understand the complexities of the political landscape he had been thrust into. He had thought he understood what he was getting into, but the reality was far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. His interactions with the princess had grown more frequent. They spent hours together in the royal gardens, talking about their respective worlds, the lives they had led, and the future that awaited them. Though they still didn't know each other well, there was a bond forming between them, something neither of them had expected when they first met. But Marcus could feel the pressure mounting. The Queen, Jalora, had made it clear that this marriage was not just about political convenience. It was about the future of the entire empire. And with every passing day, the stakes seemed higher. One morning, as Marcus was walking through the halls of the palace, he was summoned to the Queen's chambers. The walls were adorned with banners of the royal family, each depicting an image of the Queen standing proudly over a field of stars. The room was filled with strange, shimmering lights that made the place feel alive, as though it were pulsing with energy. "Enter!" the Queen's voice rang out from within. Marcus pushed the heavy door open and stepped inside. The Queen was seated at a grand table, papers and holographic displays scattered before her. She looked up as he entered, her violet eyes studying him intently. "Marcus, sit!" she commanded, motioning to the chair across from her. He obeyed, but the tension in the room was palpable. There was no mistaking the sense of authority that the Queen held. Her presence was overwhelming, and even though he had been in her presence several times before, the feeling never went away. "I trust you have been spending time with my daughter," Jalora began, her voice cold but not unkind. "I expect you to become familiar with her, both personally and politically. Your union will serve not only to unite our worlds, but also to strengthen the Empire. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded. "I understand, Your Highness." The Queen's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity of her words never faltered. "This is not just a marriage, Marcus.
It is a partnership. You will have a role to play in the future of this empire.
My daughter may be the heir, but her rule will depend on the strength of those around her, including you." Marcus had known this. The Queen had spoken of it in the past, but hearing it again, in such blunt terms, made the weight of the situation even clearer. He wasn't just a guest in this palace. He was becoming part of the royal family, a key player in an empire that spanned countless worlds.
"Do not take this lightly,"
the Queen continued.
"The factions that oppose me are many.
There are those within the court who seek to undermine my rule, to weaken my family. And there are those outside the palace who will stop at nothing to bring the empire to its knees. You will help us defend it." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. And if I refuse? Zelora's eyes flashed. A warning, but she didn't raise her voice. Refuse, and you will have no future here. You will not be freed, and your fate will be sealed. But choose to stand with us, and you will have power. Not just as a consort, but as a ruler in your own right. You will help shape the future of this empire. The Queen's words were tempting, but Marcus could see the cost. This was not a simple marriage. This was a life-altering commitment. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he was trapped. There was no easy way out. I want to help, Marcus said quietly, but I need to understand what I'm up against. What exactly are these factions? And what do they want? The Queen regarded him with a cool expression, her eyes narrowing slightly. There are many, Marcus. Some are led by rival nobles who desire power. Others are radicals who wish to see the entire system torn down. They will stop at nothing to see me dethroned, and they will use any means necessary to get what they want. Marcus sat back in his chair, processing her words. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. This wasn't just a political game. It was a battle for survival, for control of an entire galaxy, and he was now a part of it. You will meet some of them soon, the Queen continued. I'm sending you to one of our neighboring planets, one that has been a hotbed for rebellion. I want you to see firsthand the threats we face. Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. Understood, he said, his voice steady. When do we leave? Tomorrow, the Queen replied. Prepare yourself. As Marcus left the Queen's chambers, the weight of his responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. The quiet palace that had seemed so peaceful now felt like a prison. Every corner seemed to whisper of the dangers that lurked beyond its walls. He wasn't just marrying the princess anymore. He was becoming part of a much larger struggle, one that could determine the fate of countless lives. Later that evening, Marcus met with the princess in the gardens, as they had done many times before. The flowers in the royal garden glowed softly in the moonlight, their colors shifting as if alive. The sound of distant winds filled the air, a calming presence in the otherwise tense atmosphere. The princess was standing by the fountain, her hands resting on the edge of the stone basin. Her back was turned to him when Marcus approached, but she turned at the sound of his footsteps. You've met with my mother, she said, her tone light, but with a hint of curiosity.
I have, Marcus replied. She's made it clear that this isn't just a marriage.
It's more than I expected. The princess nodded, her expression serious. I know.
My mother she does what she must to protect this empire.
And sometimes that means making sacrifices. The marriage is just one of them. Marcus took a step closer, the soft grass beneath his boots barely making a sound. I'm not sure what I'm walking into. She's sending me to a rebellious planet tomorrow. I'll be expected to... What? Fight? Negotiate? The princess's eyes softened, a look of understanding passing between them. She's sending you to see what we face. The rebellion isn't just about power. It's about survival. Some of these factions will do anything to tear us apart. They don't care who they destroy in the process. Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. This wasn't just about his freedom. This wasn't just about marriage. It was about something far bigger, far more dangerous. I didn't sign up for this, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't either, the princess replied, her voice just as soft. But sometimes we don't get to choose our paths. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. Marcus looked at the princess, his gaze lingering on her face, on the vulnerability she wore so openly. He had come to respect her more than he had expected. She was not just a grieving widow. She was a leader, a woman who was facing the impossible and still standing tall. "I'll do what I can," Marcus said at last.
"I'll stand by you. Not because I have to, but because I believe in what you're trying to do."
The princess's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of hope in them. It was small, but it was there. "Thank you," she said softly. "I need you, Marcus. More than you know." As they stood together in the quiet of the royal gardens, Marcus realized that he was no longer just a soldier fighting for his freedom. He was becoming part of something far larger than himself. And though the future was uncertain, he knew that whatever happened, he was in it now, for better or for worse. The road ahead was dangerous, but it was one they would walk together. The day of departure had arrived sooner than Marcus had expected. The quiet uncertainty that had settled in his chest during his time in the palace had slowly turned into a heavy weight, one that he could no longer ignore. Today he would leave the safety of the royal palace and venture into the unknown. His mission was clear: observe, learn, and understand the dangers that the empire faced. But even with the clarity of the queen's instructions, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far darker than he had imagined. He stood in the courtyard, staring up at the ship that would carry him to the distant planet. The vessel was sleek and metallic, designed for both speed and stealth. It was the kind of ship that would glide through the stars without a sound, its engines humming quietly as it moved through the vast emptiness of space. Marcus had flown in many ships before, but none that felt like this one. There was something about it, something cold, clinical, that made him feel as though he were not a passenger, but a prisoner. The princess had not accompanied him to the ship, but she had sent her personal guard to escort him. Marcus could see them standing in the distance, their posture rigid and unwavering, their eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced ease. They were silent, as always, and their presence only reminded him of the tension that still lingered between him and the princess. Though they had spoken often in the past days, their conversations had remained guarded. Neither of them had fully opened up to the other, and while there was a certain camaraderie between them, there was also an unspoken understanding that their relationship was, at best, uncertain. The marriage still hung over them, an invisible weight neither of them could escape. Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder and turned, to find one of the guards standing behind him. "Your ship is ready, sir," the guard said, his voice as emotionless as ever. Marcus nodded and followed the guard toward the ship. As he approached the entrance, the ramp lowered slowly and he stepped inside. The interior of the ship was quiet, illuminated by the soft glow of blue lights along the walls. There were no windows here, no view of the outside world, only the hum of the engines that would carry him into the stars. It was both comforting and unsettling, the silence of the ship pressing in on him from all sides. He found a seat near the back of the ship and strapped himself in. His thoughts drifted back to the princess. He wondered what she was doing now, whether she was as anxious as he was about what lay ahead. She had not spoken to him much about the mission, but he knew she was well aware of the risks involved. The rebellion had grown more powerful in recent months, and though the queen had a firm grip on the empire, there were those who would challenge her at every turn. Marcus could feel the weight of that challenge pressing down on him, as though it were not just an empire at stake, but something far more personal. The ship began to hum as it prepared for takeoff, and Marcus could feel the pull of gravity shift as the vessel lifted off the ground. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet vibration of the ship lull him into a strange sense of calm. He didn't know what awaited him on this rebellious planet, but he had no choice but to face it. The queen had given him a mission, and he would see it through, not just for her, but for the princess and the future of the empire. Hours passed, and the ship sailed through the stars at unimaginable speeds. The vastness of space stretched out before him, a seemingly endless sea of black and silver. For a moment he allowed himself to relax, but his mind quickly returned to the task at hand. He had come here to observe the threats facing the empire, but he was beginning to realize that the true threat might not be from the outside, but from within. The rebellion was not just a matter of political power. It was a matter of survival for many of the Empire's subjects. There were those who had suffered under the Queen's rule, who felt that they had been oppressed by the very system that was supposed to protect them. And the princess, his future wife, was at the heart of it all. She was the heir to the throne, but in many ways, she was also a symbol of the Empire's contradictions. She was both the face of hope and the reminder of the pain that many had endured. The ship's communication system buzzed to life, pulling him from his thoughts. The voice of the pilot came over the speaker, announcing their arrival at the planet. "We are approaching the coordinates now. Prepare for landing," the pilot's voice said. Marcus stood, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the reality of it hit him like a wave. He had no idea what he was walking into. This was not just a political mission. It was a test of his loyalty, his courage, and his ability to survive in a world that was not his own. The ship began its descent, the stars outside blurring into streaks of light as the planet's atmosphere enveloped them. The landing was smooth, but Marcus could feel the change in the air as they touched down. The planet was different from the royal palace. Much different. The air was thick with the smell of dust and smoke, and the ground below seemed barren, as if life had been drained from it. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and Marcus stood up from his seat, preparing to disembark. As he walked toward the exit, he felt a surge of uncertainty. This was no longer a mission of observation. It was a mission of survival. And the longer he stayed here, the more he realized how deeply entangled he was in the fate of this empire. As the ramp lowered, he stepped out into the dusty landscape. The heat hit him immediately, a harsh contrast to the cool interior of the ship. He squinted against the sun, the bright light blinding him for a moment before his eyes adjusted. The planet was a wasteland. There were no signs of life, only crumbled buildings and the faint traces of a once thriving settlement. The sounds of distant voices reached his ears, carried on the wind, but they were muffled, almost indistinct. Marcus was greeted by a group of armed soldiers, their faces grim as they approached him. They were part of the Queen's military, but their presence here seemed less about protection and more about control. He couldn't help but feel that he was walking into a hornet's nest, and he wasn't sure if he was the intruder or the prey. "We're here to guide you, sir," one of the soldiers said, his voice flat. "Follow us." Marcus nodded and followed the soldiers as they led him through the ruins. The air was thick with tension, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every step he took seemed to echo in the empty streets, the silence of the place only broken by the distant sounds of rebellion. They stopped in front of a large building that seemed to be the center of the resistance. It was a makeshift fortress, constructed from the wreckage of old structures, with walls reinforced by metal and stone. The doors were heavy, but they opened silently, revealing a dark interior lit only by flickering lights. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, filled with the murmur of voices and the soft clatter of weapons being prepared. This was no ordinary rebellion. This was a movement, one that had been growing for years, fueled by anger and resentment. A man stepped forward from the shadows, his face hard and weathered. His eyes locked onto Marcus, and for a moment the two of them simply stared at each other. "You must be the soldier," the man said, his voice rough. "The one the Queen sent." Marcus didn't respond right away. He was still processing the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a mission to observe. This was a mission to survive, and he had no idea who the true enemy was anymore. "I'm here to learn," Marcus said at last. "To understand what you're fighting for." The man nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Then you'll learn quickly. The question is, will you be able to handle the truth?" As Marcus stepped deeper into the heart of the rebellion, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a player in a game that was far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The rebellion was only the beginning, and the future of the Empire would depend on the choices he made now.